Well, hello to everybody. I'm really happy to introduce my two guests for today, Veronika Mora, who's environmentalist and NGO activist from Hungary, and Jeleno Vasić, who's my colleague, also an investigative journalist from Krik in Serbia. And hello, could you just briefly introduce yourself, like who you are and what are you doing?
Shall I start or?
Yes, you can start.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as I said, my name is Veronika Mora. I'm the director of Ökotaž, the Hungarian Environmental Partnership Foundation, which is an organization that aims at strengthening and supporting civil society in Hungary. We started out as a foundation that supports environmental organizations, but over time our focus has broadened and we play a very active role in Hungarian civil society networks and corporations and work against shrinking civil space in Hungary.
Jelena?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeleno Vasić. I'm, as said, investigative journalist and the project manager of investigative portal Krik. We're a Belgrade-based investigative online portal, and we have been working for 5 years. We are specifically investigating organized crime and corruption in Serbia, and we have done a lot of very serious investigation of corruption cases, high corruption cases in Serbia. And because of that, we have had many different pressures, but I guess we will have much time to talk about it today.
Sure. Maybe you can continue, because maybe for our listeners, it would be interesting to maybe put your medium and your work in context. For example, why would you be a target of any kind of attack in your media environment?
Well, it's always hard to explain someone who is not living in Serbia. Here it's normal for us actually, and it's kind of sad, but it is normal for us. So every investigative media, every independent investigative media in Serbia is under pressure because this government is very hostile towards any kind of criticism. Or to be precise, they do not recognize the truth as the criticism, they see it as the attack on them. And they always describe every investigation, every discovery of every documented discovery of a corruption case as just direct attack paid by someone from abroad to withdraw this government. Or at least this is the narrative they have been, playing during these past 10 years or even more. This has been mostly the narrative of this government, but it has been sometimes in the past also mentioned in the previous authorities. Since I mentioned, we are doing very hard-hitting investigations. We write about ministers, prime minister, president, mayors, and we discover their involvement in very serious corruption and even more dangerous, I must say, their direct links to some of organized crime groups. And when you have something like that published and documented, you would expect in a very functioning democracy that on the next day, that person, that minister or prime minister, whoever, resigns or to be fired by a higher, by his boss in a way. No, in Serbia, you have the opposite. You have the attack on a journalist who discovered that. So that is to set up the environment. That is how we work. And I must say that after every investigation, we expect to have a smear campaign the next day in tabloids. We expect to be called, traitors, enemies of the state, and to have much more serious attacks like wiretapping, like, lawsuits that are ungrounded, like attacks of our homes. It's a very, very hostile environment, and I cannot compare us to Turkey or Russia, but I can compare us to Hungary for sure. So I guess my colleague will tell you very similar situation in her country.
Yes, Ms. Mora. So how does your organization fit into the NGO landscape of Hungary? Are you also considered to be one of the bad NGOs?
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for the invitation. Actually, what Jelena described for the Serbian situation could be repeated for Hungary word by word. And that stands both for investigative journalists and independent civil society organizations, particularly those that speak up on certain issues, advocate on behalf of social groups, or, God forbid, criticize the government. They are also considered as enemies. And what you also probably experienced in your countries, that they are members of the arch enemy network, the Soros network, linked to the famous American philanthropists. In Hungary, specifically affecting civil society, we've seen a trend of shrinking space for the last 7-8 years. The first major conflict affecting civil society took place in 2014. It started just after Fidesz, the leading governing party, has won the general elections for the second time in a row. The conflict focused on the NGO program of the EA Norway grants. That is a support mechanism that is also active in Slovenia and other Central and Eastern European EU member states. And my foundation, as a leading partner in a consortium, managed the civil society support program within this whole EA Norway grants mechanism. And as such, we were attacked first with accusations of being politically biased, but also later as frauds or mismanaging these funds. But really, in reality, the major problem was that this was a considerable amount of funding aimed to support independent civil society, including human rights organizations, anti-corruption NGOs, women's organizations, and LGBTQ organizations as well. And these were specifically targeted by the government. The nature or the process of shrinking civil space had very distinct phases in Hungary, which I think is similar to elsewhere as well. It started as media smear campaigns vilifying these organizations. Then it turned into harassing inspections by various governmental agencies with very questionable legal grounds. Which further culminated or further continued in criminal accusations around the NGO program of the EA Norway grants, culminating in a house raid at our offices and our partners' offices in September 2014, and then continued in legal battles. Later on, in 2017, we've also seen restrictive legislation. In that year, the parliament has passed an act on foreign funded organizations stigmatizing civil society groups that receive funding from abroad, regardless whether it's public or private or comes from within the EU or elsewhere. And this was a year later in 2018, followed by another legal package called the so-called the Stop Soros legal package, which targeted organizations working with asylum seekers and refugees, basically criminalizing aid provided to these people, and also introduced a punitive tax of 25% on all the incomes of organizations that support immigration, whatever that is. The 2017 legislation on foreign funded organization has just this June been declared by the European Court of Justice to be in contrary or in breach of EU law on several counts. I can go into it later. And the Stop Soros legislation is likely going to the European Court of Justice quite soon as well. But this doesn't stop the Hungarian government to further on pick out unwanted organizations and to continue with their smear campaigns and vilification. And as you mentioned, government communication also very strongly divides the sector into good organizations and the bad organizations, meaning that, and also very clearly defining what the role of civil society should be, that is to carry or implement very traditional charitable and recreational activities. Those are the good organizations who restrict them to these, and those who move beyond and speak up are going into the bad organization category. This has quite strong effects, indirect effects, chilling effects on civil society, but I will stop here and maybe continue later.
Thank you. Jelena, has your government also tried to implement some kind of anti-Krik legislation, or do they stick to attacks over tabloids and stuff like that?
Yeah, actually, it's scary how the modus operandi is similar here and in Hungary. I have been aware of that because we have very good investigative colleagues in Hungary, and I know their troubles as well. There have been some attempts of trying to even fit in the law those kind of that kind of a narrative that NGOs should be watched upon differently. It's not implemented yet, but the initiative has been launched during the last year. But I can for sure give you a very recent example of how the Serbian government is going in that direction. It's from July this year. At the beginning of July, we had Belgrade street protests, anti-governmental street protests that were launched actually because they were anti-lockdown, but basically they just continued to be anti-governmental. And almost immediately after that, like 5 days after that, because the biggest question in the tabloids was who is behind the protest, because it's not possible that the citizens are behind it, that they're angry and they want the change. No, that's not the option. They tried to think of the solution, and one of them, as I see it, was that anti-money laundering agency actually in July launched illegal or questionably, very questionably illegal investigation against NGOs and independent media. And they were investigating around 30 organizations and 20 individuals, almost all of them like highly outspoken and critical towards this government. And they were listed as the ones who are the bad ones, as my colleague said. And they were investigated, they started the investigation of, are those organizations, media, NGOs and individuals, activists, are they financing terrorism?
Hmm.
And that was the official investigation route, but luckily it was leaked to journalists. Someone from the banks, I guess, leaked that information because the investigation already started, you know, and that has showed us the way, you know, this government really sees us. They're trying to to set the image that we're like completely the terrorists, you know, like the organizations who are trying to destroy the democracy, or you know, even the lives themselves. And the problem is that actually they started backing down. They started explaining like, this is just a regular check, you know, and it's completely normal. We're checking everyone, not just you. But the thing is, of course, that kind of investigation needs to have a very specific legal grounds, like why are you questioning me for financing terrorism if I'm just investigating crime and corruption? Isn't it kind of ironic? And the thing that happened, I think that was crucial, is the public pressure. We just we came together and made a big deal about it, and you know, talked publicly about it, and communicated with the international community. That's like the only thing that works here if you're talking to international community. And just like 2 weeks ago, the UN Department for Human Rights has reacted and said that this was definitely the violation of the law by Serbian government, and a way of intimidating those organizations and individuals, and just like an excuse for them to get to know more about our finances, which are ironically completely transparent. You know, if they would just go to our website, they would see who funds us. Yeah, that's like just one example, including NGOs and independent media, and the most recent one. That just the one that was, you know, discovered because it was leaked. We don't know how many secret investigations are still ongoing and have been. And we know that for sure from our example, because we discovered that our office was illegally wiretapped, that our journalists were followed, and their conversations were monitored, and we had to change offices and completely change our security protocols because of that. And we had, you know, our private conversations printed in tabloids as a way to intimidate us. We had so many smear campaigns that could be only launched by the government because you see their fingerprints there. But as my colleague said, I can go on entire day. Just stop me and you know, we can discuss it in details.
So basically what you are describing is that the government is trying to use any means or any tools that they have, either through legislation or through the access to specific services, to actually try to attack you and silence you down. For example, as you said, and I've already talked to one of your colleagues, that if your personal conversations are printed in a pro-government tabloid, there are not so many possible ways of how they got this.
Of course. I mean, we're very aware they're using security agencies. They're using, you know, they're using them illegally, because also if you want to you know, have a surveillance over someone, you very much need the grounds for it. And it has been proven so many times that they're actually not using the intelligence offices and security agencies for fighting crime, because they are partly involved in some organized crime groups. they're using it against opposition, against NGOs, against independent media. We are like their biggest clients, as I can say, and it's been scary in a way, because I describe it several times on different conferences. The way we see why they're using that wiretapping and following our journalists is because they're trying to get to know what the story will be before we publish it.
Yeah.
And then they can prepare themselves. They can prepare the spin, which has happened so far 2 times. They have prepared the spin even before we published the story, and that was kind of, you know, giving out their modus operandi. Like, it's the only way you could find out what we're doing on by, you know, listening to us. But you know, that's not something that should stop anyone. That just should be like additional motive to work more on your investigations.
Ms. Mora, do you also have this kind of misuse of state agencies in Hungary?
Fortunately, we have very little or no indication that this is happening. Back in 2014, during the conflict over the EA Norway Grants NGO program, we experienced that documents that we handed over during the course of the inspection to the so-called government control agency, those papers found their ways in the pro-government media in about 2 days. And at that time, there were also some indications that we are wiretapped. However, since then, we haven't really found any evidence or any signs that such a direct or such a abuse of the national security organizations, or they are used against civil society. So unless they are very good at it, and we never suspected, it's not quite likely right now. There was one strange story, Jesus, was it last year or before, when several organizations working with refugees have been approached by somebody in disguising or parading as potential donors, and it turned out that they were in reality belonging to a private Israeli security company. Nobody knows who hired that company, and it was a very clumsy and unsuccessful attempt. So it's not even clear who and why orchestrated it, and wasn't successful either. So that's the only one I can mention. In Hungary's case, right now, in the last couple of years, it's rather using legal tools and media and government propaganda. So it's the smear campaigns are not just coming from the media itself, but they are really conducted by key government figures, including the Prime Minister himself, making this damning and negative statements about civil society.
For now, there's one, let's say, crucial difference between Slovenia or Hungary and Serbia when it comes to media landscape, because of course we do have also this very strong branch of media that belong to this pro-government propaganda tool, and there are also Hungarian investors that own those companies in Slovenia and Northern Macedonia. I mean, it's pretty well investigated, but they are still on the fringes. They are not mainstream media. And what kind of difference does it make if you are constantly attacked by the mainstream media? Because as far as I know, in Hungary and in Serbia, most media with most audience reach and everything are in a way pro-government. How does it feel to be against or to be exposed to such propaganda machinery?
Well, really terrible. And it's not only, not terrible for us personally, but what we see in Hungary, as you correctly said, that basically the vast majority of media is in the government's hand. The public television, public radio has been turned into complete propaganda mouthpieces. All the regional media, so the regional papers, regional radio stations are also government-owned or owned by pro-government businesses. So basically, the bulk of the media is operated from one center and echoes the same messages. And it's not only for civil society, but generally for Hungarian public discourse and political life is really detrimental, because these media simply don't give space to, you know, oppositional views or differing views, just repeat the government propaganda. They are the major distributors of fake news and misinformation. And compared to them, the truly independent media has really shrunk. I mean, by now, it's mostly only online outlets, online newspapers, and maybe like a dozen of them. I really can count remaining independent media on my two hands. And those are friendly to civil society and give space or coverage to civil society activities, but their reach is limited among the general population. So it's also, according to political lines, the kind of media people consume is also very, very different. But large sections of the population, especially in the countryside, who traditionally watched the public television, who traditionally bought the regional paper, they still do that. So they consume propaganda, and it's very hard to push through that in that respect. So for example, much of the civic organizing is now taking place in social media because there is very little else very could convey your message to the broader public, but also that has limitations, as we all know.
Jelena?
Unfortunately, as my colleague said, like I can repeat it word by word. It's pretty much the same. You know, mainstream media are controlled by the government, and independent investigative media are now pushed online. If you want to inform yourself of what is actually going on, you need to have the internet, and you need to be, you know, able to get through all the fake news and to the independent media. You have one television and one daily newspaper that are independent, that are objective, I can say, and all other mainstream media are completely controlled. The public television is also under a huge censorship. You have tabloids, like very, very high selling tabloids attacking NGOs and media very frequently. It's you know, it's a situation when your neighbor does not trust you anymore because she reads that tabloid. She read information about you in that tabloid. She knows you for 20 years, but she still reads that tabloid every day. And, you know, she sometimes trusts them than us. It is scary and intimidating, but you cannot, you know, stop doing your job. We have been very successful in the terms of numbers. Like we have 500,000 readers per month, so that's success in Serbia. Yeah. I mean, I can say that of course there is a space for wider audience because we have 7 million people, but it's you know, you cannot reach the small villages not having internet. You cannot reach anyone who does not watch anything else but television. And we are invited only to be guests on that 1 or 2 independent televisions, and they're only on cable, you know.
Ms. Moria?
Yeah, maybe just one thing to add. Another thing that very strongly distorts the media landscape is advertising. In Hungary, by now, the state is the biggest advertiser.
Yeah.
And where they, or state-owned companies. And obviously, they only put advertisements in their own media. So basically, they are pumping up their own media with state-paid advertisements. Which again, from the financial point of view, puts independent media in a difficult position. However, the good news is that more and more of the independent online outlets rely on micro donations and crowdsourcing, so collecting money from people, and people actually do give. So I think it's a very important sign that people are supporting the outlets and the independent investigative journalists that they consider important.
Yes, I would like to add, we actually copied the model that our colleagues from Hungary at Lazzo and Direct 36 are implementing. The donation model support independent journalism as a way, you know, of fighting this battle with us, anti-corruption battle. So it has been actually very, you know, overwhelming to see citizens really in these difficult situations giving a part of their, you know, modest finances to you, and that's something that is kind of promising and gives you hope. And you know, you need to work even harder when that's the situation. But also what Veronica said, like those mainstream media, they get the most of the funds, of the state funds. We would of course never accepted the state funds. It would be impossible for us. But the thing is, the media that are accepting the biggest amounts of state funds are the ones producing the biggest amounts of fake news. And they're, you know, creating the narrative for the government. And we actually have also the debunking website Razkrikavanje, as you had in Slovenia, Razkrikavanje. We're actually partners with them, and we love their work. And that was also the way to fight it. Like, okay, we will also try to point to the fake news and tell citizens, okay, they're lying to us, to you, and us through these tabloids in this way.
Yeah, I think that we also have some very good experience with this kind of new models, and we're also really happy that our readers support us, even in times when it's not that bad as in Serbia and in Hungary. But there are like two problems. First problem is that it's really hard to fight. Media space online is really fragmented, and you have to deal, you know, with the social networks, with the algorithms, with everything. And it's really impossible to expose anybody to a very consistent message, which if you have a centralized news production, like, you know, the state television, you can do it like every day. You can repeat the same message and reach the same amount of audience. You don't have this kind of centralized media source online. That's one problem. And the second is, we also learned that the new, or let's say the new censorship attempts, they do not focus as much also on how to silence you, but how to infect the media space online with a lot of spam and fake news and other content. So you have Krik, but then you have like 5 or 6 very suspicious portals who also claim to be, you know, the investigative reporters and stuff like that, but they're actually AstroTurf organizations. Have you seen such examples also in Serbia and Macedonia, that the government or some government circles are trying to actually build up a AstroTurf network of fake NGOs, of fake media, in order to confuse the audience?
Of course. It's like we have gongos before they were cool, you know. So actually, we had several organizations that were trying to mirror our work. But the fact is, they're very obvious in their fakeness, you know. They investigate only the opposition. They investigate only the investigative journalists. they're like they're really just taking one side so obviously that if you are an independent, educated audience, you will never buy them. They don't have impressum, they don't have, you know, the list of journalists working for them. They hide the ownership of their website. They're very, you know, murky and kind of, it's hard to deceive anyone who has at least some knowledge of, you know, media literacy. I mean, in Serbia, they were launched, but several times, different ones, but they don't last long. They just, they're like purposed for one campaign, for one smear campaign action, you know, and then you never heard of them again. And basically, it has not been so hard to fight them. But what happens is that mainstream media, the one controlled by the government, now quote them.
Sure.
And say, like, this small new investigative center has discovered this and this, and they quote it as, you know, something legitimate. So that is the problem. That's their purpose, because you, as a mainstream television, as you know, a well-known daily newspaper controlled by the government, you cannot allow yourself that amount of lies, but you can quote someone, and you're kind of free by the law, you know. So that was a good tool to actually use against NGOs and media. But as I say, we have learned how to communicate this with our audience. That was also one of the reasons we started, you know, our debunking websites, to show media manipulations, to show the fake news media, not just only fake news articles. So that is how we try to fight it. It's you know, David and Goliath, but we need to continue. That's I believe that's their intention is to silence us. So why should we let them do that?
Ms. Mora, do you also have kind of fake NGOs?
Absolutely. As regards media, we have similar pro-government sites that claim to be investigative, and we also have this very typical phenomenon that then the mainstream media quotes them, and then in the follow-up they quote the mainstream media. So basically, if you look into it, then the quotes go around, and they are the source of one another. As regards civil society, we also do have gongos that have been very clearly set up to counter real civil society. So for one example is the so-called Civil Cooperation Forum, which claims to be the biggest civil society network in Central Europe, and they organize the so-called peace marches in support of government policies. Or we have the Center for Fundamental Rights, which is very clearly was established to counter real human rights organizations, and their people are very regular talking heads in the public television and in public media. But as regards your earlier comment on fragmentation, I can't really speak for media, but in terms of civil society, how we responded in Hungary was to get together and establish a coalition of 30 plus major civil society organizations coming from different areas and topics. This was created in response to this 2017 foreign funded legislation that I mentioned earlier. And one of the things that we try to do together is to put out coordinated messages to promote a positive image of civil society, so as to show generally why civil society organizations are important in the society and what they do for the benefit of Hungarian people. And I mean, it's a long way to go, but I think it's one of the possible solutions to have a better coordinated communication, focusing not just on the topical issues, but generally on the role and the importance of civil society. And actually, with civilization, we had a survey, public opinion poll research conducted last November, and this have showed that in spite of the smear campaigns, Hungarian people still view civil society more positive than not. So that's a good sign that we have something to build upon.
So if education, organization, partnership, positive messaging, this all are kind of proven strategies that work. But do you have any idea, and it's a speculative question, what are your governments most afraid of? Is it their image, pressure from the outside, for whom, or because we now see, this thing about Poland and Hungary playing this game with the EU, and if you somehow manage to present yourself as a victim to your own voters, what local leaders tend to do, especially when some pressures or something come from the EU, it's always, the bad EU that we're fighting against is now trying to silence us, like we are the victims. Does it play? Does it work? Do you have any ideas what is it that they could be afraid of, or I don't know?
It's a very difficult question. What is for sure, afraid, I don't know whether that's a good term, because at least the Hungarian government and the PM himself, he very much likes to engage in fights and always have an enemy pinpointed that they fight against, be them, migrants, LGBT people, the EU, Brussels, not the EU, Brussels.
Yeah, Brussels.
So that's what they thrive on, and that's the foundation of their communication, to keep their supporters alert and active through this continuous fight. Even the pandemic, the prime minister throughout the whole pandemic always used this very warlike or military communication, that how we are in the front line and how we are firing back against the pandemic. So that kind of style. So I think this is what keeps their supporters mobilized and active. Those who don't like this kind of communication can more be are less supportive of the government. So I think fear actually is a very important tool that the government uses to further its goals.
Yeah, that's a good point. And same in Slovenia. I think that if you made an kind of analysis of how to fight pandemic, everything is in military terms. Jelena?
Well, it's pretty much the same. That's the most common sentence used today. So it's kind of course, our president is always the victim. It depends who is attacking him on that day, but he is always the victim. If we publish, 4 photographs of his son sitting and happily chatting with convicted criminals, like 4 different occasions he was photographed with convicted criminals, it immediately becomes our attack on the president and his baby son, because that how he's portrayed. So it's just an example. Name any topic, he always uses that kind of narrative. I'm the victim, I'm being attacked, this is the attack on my family, they're pressuring me now because of the Kosovo issues, this is, you know, and during the pandemic as well, he was talking more than doctors. You can see him on
Yeah.
TV every day, and doctors are there behind, you know, quietly nodding their heads, or if allowed to say something. And also, and I mean, that is a good point, making the atmosphere of fear and making the atmosphere of like shifting your attention, because you need to have your attention on your health, on your finances, on the situation that is going to, you know, endanger your life. But then he throws in throughout his media, like fight with Montenegro, fight with Croatia, fight with Kosovo, potentially like warlike situation. And that's like, okay, we need to focus now on that, you know. So that's a very, very similar modus operandi they use, and it actually works, you know. When my grandfather was alive, he asked me, like, every time I visit my hometown, he always, the first question is not like, how are you? It's like, why are they again trying to kill Vučić? You know? Because he watches the televisions every day, and almost every other day there is like a public outcry because the president is in danger and is going to be killed. So that was his question to me almost every time. And that is devastating. But the fact is, the people who really realize that is like a stage, that is like, you know, a narrative and everything, they don't vote. That's the problem.
There's a problem.
That's it.
Maybe to open for
Yes,
questions.
I think that here we can now open the stage for questions, and I think that our master of ceremony, Anastasia, is taking close look on whether there are any questions already. No?
We were so clear.
We're just so clear. Well, I'm almost certain that...
vprašanje na prvi del predstavitve, ali pa smo že v 2 urah vso voljo za vprašanja potisnili.
I think that Brankica probably is dying to ask something.
Ja, ali pa mogoče bi lahko tudi kakšna, imamo tukaj tudi predstavnike drugih nevladnih organizacij Slovenije. We are having here the representatives of some non-governmental organizations from Slovenia. Maybe they could share some of their experience with the government and the pressures.
Because maybe one of the most important messages here is that nothing of what we have just described is not normal and should not be normal. We should not just accept it's the way it is, because I think that in our own media and NGO bubbles, it can easily feel like that. So maybe just very personal question for both of you. How do you motivate yourself?
That's a very good question. Well, if you mean normal, is that we accept that we are the targets of smear campaigns. In a way, yes and no. I mean, our threshold has become much higher than a couple of years ago. So now we just shrug if we see another article in a pro-government media pinpointing our organization and repeating the same old things. While 5-6 years ago, we were much more sensitive to this. So yes, there is a certain desensitization, but I mean, that's absolutely necessary to keep your sanity, because if you react to all these lies, then you would really do nothing else than to try to somehow deal with this. So you have to have a bit of a tough skin or a thick skin to manage this. And you really have to focus on the good things that you do and the other organizations and your partners and the allies do. So for me, the important thing is that we as an organization, for example, support grassroots activism and local community groups that can make a difference locally in their own lives and in their own environments. And it was shown very clearly, for example, in the last local elections that took place in Hungary in autumn 2019, where local activists, local community groups got really active around the elections, not only partly to mobilize people to vote, to monitor the fairness of the elections, but also to run candidates locally for the municipal councils and mayors. And these organizations were successful in a number of places. I mean, of course, in the bigger places in like Budapest, that got more publicity, but also in smaller locations, in villages and small towns, civil society organizations achieved successes in terms of the local elections. So I think that besides creating coalitions and working together, to me, the other very important thing is to really start from the basics and support and have this grassroots bottom-up organizing of everyday people, let's say.
Jelena?
Well, I was going to say the thick skin thing at the beginning, like you get it over the years. Like if you don't, you just quit. But the thing is, you get used to it, even though we were here in Serbia debating like the same thing you mentioned, like this should not be normal. We should stop explaining it and communicating it as a normal thing that happens after you investigate someone, or a normal thing that happens because you are investigating crime and corruption. We should really start communicating more towards our audience, like, okay, you have to have a logic behind this. If we do something and after that get attacked, it should have some consequences. And the thing is, I always also use like an example of firefighters. They don't see their job as difficult. They just see it as a job. You do this because this is your job. So I don't have to motivate myself to do my job. It's like, it's normal for me to do this. So it's not an option for me not to do this. I really would not know what to work on and find it meaningful. I could write poems, but would I change, something with that? Maybe. But also, you cannot quit with so many people. Like if we have 500,000 readers and they really support us like heartily, they are so open in their public support towards us. So you cannot just quit them. So that's the thing.
Yeah, but we also need to, emphasize that the government is not really attacking the firefighters for,
Yeah, that's true. That is
through
true.
investing them, shaming them, or claiming that they're, or even claiming they're setting fires in order that they can.
Well,
I don't know.
If they find, I would not be surprised, but because nowadays everyone who speaks up against, like just like the slightest comment that is against the government, he gets like a storm of smear campaigns. We had like one of the greatest actors. You probably heard of it, Seka Sablic. She had a huge smear campaigns campaign against her just because she said that, you know, that your home is not where the homeland is, but where your stomach is full, you know. Because she was very honest about the situation in the country. And she's just an actor saying her opinion, and she got attacked. So if a firefighter tomorrow says something against Vučić, he will get attacked too. So
you're right.
Yeah.
Most likely.
Yeah.
I think that this probably is time for us to conclude. So who should have the concluding thoughts?
Maybe I should just say thank you to our dear guests from Hungary and Serbia. It was not so optimistic, but still it was inspiring, your spirit and information, your lessons you learned. Maybe we still have some time in Slovenia to stop this trend you are describing after so many years of such a model of politics and media. I call it hate and propaganda models of politics and media, to which you are exposed continuously. Maybe we have still a chance to discontinue with this, and particularly having also in mind what Lenart said about mainstream media still having some freedom and covering also what we are doing, what the opposition is doing, what you are doing in Hungary, Serbia, and so on. So there is still maybe also a hope that we will not be completely closed societies as you are describing your own. But we will be in touch with you. We need to learn from you. And I want to finish this event by calling all of us to fight for respect of human rights and for democracy. It is, as Jelena said, we have no other choice. Hvala vsem, da ste si vzeli čas danes za potrpljenje, za podporo in gremo naprej.